A quiet Florida night turned into a nightmare inside this Walmart. What one man discovered between two women, his wife and his own sister, would spiral into violence no one could have predicted. And by the end, 2 lives were gone, and a community left speechless. This is a story about trust shattered in the most unthinkable way, about secrets kept in plain sight, and about how one moment of discovery can unleash years of buried rage. Stay with us, because the shocking truth behind this story will leave you questioning everything about loyalty, love, and betrayal. Welcome to Silent Witness True Crime Stories. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe, and also download your free ebook by clicking the link in the pinned comment. Walked into a Walmart on a humid September evening in Central Florida. Only one walked out alive. There was Marcus, a 37-year-old warehouse supervisor who'd spent the last decade building what he thought was a stable life. There was his wife, Jennifer, a part-time cashier at the same Walmart where this would all unfold, and there was his younger sister, Kelly, who'd been living with them for the past 8 months after losing her apartment. On paper, they were just another working-class American family trying to get by. But underneath that ordinary surface, something had been growing, festering, waiting for the right moment to explode. So the questions we need to answer are these. Why were Jennifer and Kelly together that night, alone, in the back storage area of a 24-hour Walmart? What did Marcus see that made him lose control so completely that he'd later tell police he couldn't even remember pulling the trigger? And perhaps most disturbing of all, was this really a crime of passion? Or had Marcus been planning this moment far longer than anyone realized? To understand how we got here, we need to go back 18 months, to a time when everything seemed normal, even good. Marcus and Jennifer had been married for 9 years. They'd met at a community college in Tampa, both taking night classes while working full-time jobs. Friends described them as solid, the kind of couple who didn't make a big fuss, but seemed genuinely content with their simple life. They lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in Lakeland, a city of about 100,000 people halfway between Tampa and Orlando. It's the kind of place where everyone knows the same restaurants, shops at the same stores, and Walmart isn't just where you buy groceries, it's where you run into your neighbors, your old teachers, your co-workers. Jennifer had worked at the Walmart on South Florida Avenue for 6 years. She was reliable, friendly with customers, and according to her manager, never caused any problems. Marcus worked at a distribution center about 20 minutes away, supervising a night shift team that loaded trucks with auto parts. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and they were managing. They'd talked about having kids someday, maybe buying a bigger house, but there was no rush. They were comfortable. Then Kelly entered the picture, or rather, re-entered it. Kelly was Marcus's younger sister by 4 years, and their relationship had always been complicated. Growing up, Marcus had been the responsible one, the kid who got good grades and stayed out of trouble, while Kelly had struggled. She'd dropped out of high school, bounced between jobs, had a string of unstable relationships. Marcus had bailed her out more times than he could count, covering rent, loaning her money he knew he'd never see again, even letting her crash at their place for weeks at a time when things got really bad. In February of last year, Kelly showed up at their door again, this time with everything she owned stuffed into 2 trash bags and a broken suitcase. She'd been evicted from her apartment after losing her job at a call center. She was crying, apologizing, promising this time would be different. Marcus wanted to say no. He'd told Jennifer just 2 months earlier that he couldn't keep doing this, that Kelly needed to figure her life out on her own. But Jennifer surprised him. She said Kelly could stay. She said family was family, and they had the extra room. Marcus agreed, but he made it clear to Kelly that this was temporary, maybe 3 months max, just long enough for her to get back on her feet. Kelly promised she understood. She seemed genuinely grateful, even humble in a way Marcus hadn't seen from her in years. The first few weeks were fine. Kelly found a job waitressing at a diner, started contributing a little money for groceries. kept the house clean. Jennifer even said she liked having another woman around, someone to talk to during the day when Marcus was at work. They started doing things together, going to the gym, watching shows, shopping. Marcus thought maybe this time really would be different. But then small things started to change. Kelly quit the diner job after an argument with her manager. She said she'd find something else, but weeks went by and she wasn't even looking. She started sleeping until noon, leaving messes around the house, spending money she didn't have. When Marcus confronted her about it, she'd get defensive, accuse him of never believing in her, of always expecting her to fail, and Jennifer, instead of backing Marcus up, would often take Kelly's side, telling Marcus he was being too hard on her, that she just needed more time. This created a new tension in the house. Marcus felt like he was being ganged up on in his own home. He'd come back from his overnight shifts exhausted, only to find Kelly and Jennifer laughing together in the living room, inside jokes he wasn't part of, conversations that would stop when he entered the room. He told himself he was being paranoid, that he was just tired and stressed about money. But the feeling wouldn't go away. September 19th was a Thursday, unremarkable in every way until it wasn't. Marcus had gotten off work early that morning around 6 and had gone home to sleep. When he woke up that afternoon around 3, the house was empty. Jennifer's car was gone, and Kelly was nowhere to be found. This wasn't unusual. Jennifer's shift at Walmart started at 4, and Kelly had probably gone with her, maybe to fill out applications at nearby stores, or at least that's what Marcus assumed. He spent the evening alone, watching television, eating leftover pizza, trying to relax. Around 9:30 that night, Marcus realized he'd forgotten to pick up his blood pressure medication from the pharmacy. He'd been putting it off for days, but he was down to his last pill and knew he couldn't wait any longer. The pharmacy was inside the same Walmart where Jennifer worked. He figured he'd stop by, say hi to her, pick up his prescription, maybe grab a few things they needed for the house. He had no reason to think this trip would be anything other than routine. Marcus pulled into the Walmart parking lot at 9:52. Security footage would later confirm this timestamp, and investigators would study those final minutes before everything changed with obsessive detail, looking for any sign that Marcus knew what he was about to find. But there was nothing. He parked near the garden center entrance, walked in, headed straight for the pharmacy in the back. The store was fairly empty, just a handful of late-night shoppers wandering the aisles, a couple of employees restocking shelves. The pharmacy was closed. Marcus checked his phone, realized he'd gotten the hours wrong, that they closed at 9 on weekdays. Frustrated, he decided to at least find Jennifer, tell her he'd have to come back tomorrow, maybe see if she wanted him to wait and drive her home after her shift ended at midnight. He walked through the main store toward the front where the registers were. Jennifer wasn't at her usual checkout lane. He asked another cashier, a younger guy named Devin, if he'd seen her. Devin said yeah, she'd been there earlier, but he thought she'd gone on break maybe 20 minutes ago. Marcus checked the break room. Empty. He walked through the store again, looking down aisles, checking the bathrooms, starting to feel a small knot of confusion in his stomach. Where was she? Then he remembered the storage areas in the back, the receiving docks where trucks unloaded inventory. Employees sometimes took their breaks back there, away from customers, especially if they wanted privacy to make a phone call or just be alone for a few minutes. Marcus walked through the double doors marked "Employees Only" that led to the back warehouse area. The lighting was different here, harsh fluorescent tubes casting long shadows between pallets of boxed merchandise stacked 15 feet high. It was quieter, just the hum of ventilation and the distant sound of a forklift somewhere deeper in the warehouse. And that's when he heard it. Voices. Low but unmistakable. One was Jennifer's, the other was Kelly's. They were coming from behind a section of pallets about 30 feet ahead. Marcus moved closer, not trying to be quiet, but not announcing himself either, just walking with the casual assumption that he'd round the corner and find them chatting about something ordinary. But the tone of their voices stopped him. There was an intimacy there, a softness that made him pause just before he could see them. And then he did see them. What Marcus witnessed in that moment would later become the center of a fierce legal debate. The defense would argue he caught his wife and sister in a compromising position that would drive any reasonable person to temporary insanity. The prosecution would argue that what he saw was ambiguous, that his reaction was far out of proportion to reality. But Marcus knew what he saw, and it shattered everything he thought he knew about the two people he'd trusted most in the world. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. The first 911 call came in at 10:18. A Walmart employee named Sandra reporting sounds she thought were firecrackers coming from the back of the store. The dispatcher asked her to clarify. Sandra said, "Wait, people are running. Something's wrong. I think those were gunshots." 17 seconds later, a second call came in. This one from a customer near the automotive section who said she heard screaming and what sounded like multiple pops, and now everyone was running toward the exits. Police arrived 4 minutes later. Lakeland Police Department, 2 patrol units initially, then 4 more within minutes as the scope of what had happened became clear. Officers entered through the main entrance with guns drawn, following panicked employees and customers who were streaming out. The scene they found in the back storage area would be described by the first responding officer as one of the most disturbing he'd encountered in 15 years on the force. Jennifer was on the ground, unresponsive, 3 gunshot wounds to her torso. Kelly was a few feet away, 2 gunshot wounds, 1 to the chest and 1 to the head, and Marcus was sitting on the concrete floor between them, his back against a pallet of paper towels, a 9mm handgun on the ground beside him, his hands covered in blood. He wasn't crying. He wasn't moving. He was just staring at nothing, his face completely blank. When officers approached him, Marcus didn't resist. He didn't speak. He let them handcuff him, let them walk him out through the store where dozens of phones were recording, where the flashing red and blue lights of police cars were turning the parking lot into a chaotic nightmare of sirens and confused bystanders trying to understand what they'd just survived. Paramedics pronounced both women dead at the scene. The Walmart was shut down, turned into an active crime scene with yellow tape and evidence markers, and forensic photographers documenting every angle, every detail. News crews arrived within half an hour, setting up outside the police perimeter, going live with breaking news reports that would dominate local coverage for days. By midnight, the story had gone national. A man kills his wife and sister inside a Walmart. The details were sparse at first, just the basic facts, but the public's imagination filled in the gaps with speculation, rumors, theories. Social media exploded with questions. Why would he do this? What could possibly justify this? Were there warning signs? The investigation moved quickly. Detectives interviewed more than 40 Walmart employees and customers who'd been in the store that night. They pulled security footage from 23 different cameras, building a timeline of everyone's movements. They searched Marcus and Jennifer's house, looking for evidence of premeditation. They interviewed friends, family, neighbors, trying to build a psychological profile. What they found was a man who, by all accounts, had no history of violence, no criminal record, no complaints from neighbors, no reports of domestic disturbance. Co-workers at the distribution center described him as quiet, competent, maybe a little stressed lately, but nothing alarming. But they also found something else. Text messages between Jennifer and Kelly, hundreds of them over the past 6 months, that revealed a relationship far closer than anyone had realized. Nothing explicitly romantic, but intimate in a way that raised questions. Inside jokes, late-night conversations, plans made without including Marcus. And then there were the messages from Marcus to a friend at work, sent 3 weeks before the shooting, where he'd written that he felt like a stranger in his own home, that something was going on between Jennifer and Kelly, but he couldn't prove it, that he was losing his mind trying to figure out what he was missing. Marcus didn't speak for the first 48 hours after his arrest. He sat in the interrogation room, still wearing the blood-stained clothes from that night, and said nothing. His lawyer advised him to stay silent, But even the lawyer seemed unnerved by Marcus's complete emotional shutdown. It was like he'd left his body, gone somewhere else entirely. But on the third day, something broke. A detective named Rita Morales, a 23-year veteran with a reputation for getting suspects to open up, sat down across from Marcus and didn't ask him about the shooting. Instead, she asked him about his childhood, about growing up with Kelly, about always being the one who had to take care of her, always being the responsible one while she got to be the mess. And Marcus started talking. Not about the shooting, not at first, but about everything that led up to it. He talked for 4 hours, and what emerged was a portrait of a man who'd spent his entire life feeling second place, feeling used, feeling like no matter how hard he tried or how much he sacrificed, it was never enough. He talked about how Kelly had always been their mother's favorite, how she'd always gotten away with things he'd been punished for, how he'd been expected to look after her even when she treated him like garbage. He talked about meeting Jennifer, about thinking he'd finally found someone who put him first, who saw him as the priority. And then he talked about the last 8 months, about watching Jennifer and Kelly become inseparable, about feeling like he'd been replaced in his own marriage. He talked about confronting Jennifer 2 months earlier, asking her directly if something was going on between her and Kelly. Jennifer had laughed it off, told him he was being ridiculous, that they were just friends, that he was being insecure and controlling. But Marcus knew what he felt. He knew the way they looked at each other. He knew the way conversations stopped when he entered rooms. He knew. And then came the night of the shooting. Marcus described walking into that storage area, seeing Jennifer and Kelly standing close together. Too close. Jennifer's hand on Kelly's face, both of them smiling in a way he'd never seen them smile at him. He said something, he couldn't remember what, and they jumped apart, startled. Kelly started explaining, making excuses, but Marcus wasn't listening. Jennifer looked angry, not guilty, angry that he was there, angry that he'd interrupted them. She said something. He couldn't remember exactly what. Something dismissive, something that confirmed every suspicion he'd had for months. And then Kelly said the thing that made him snap. She said, "Why do you even care? You've never made her happy anyway." Those words, according to Marcus, flipped a switch in his brain. He said he didn't remember deciding to pull out the gun, a weapon he'd bought 6 months earlier for home protection, and had been carrying in his jacket pocket lately because he worked nights in a rough area. He didn't remember aiming. He didn't remember pulling the trigger the first time, or the second, or any of the times after that. His next clear memory was sitting on the floor, the gun beside him, and the 2 people he'd loved most in the world lying dead in front of him. The prosecution would later argue this was too convenient, that claiming not to remember was a classic defense strategy, but multiple psychologists who evaluated Marcus agreed his account was consistent with a dissociative state brought on by extreme emotional trauma. The question wasn't whether Marcus had killed them, he'd never denied that, but whether he'd planned it, or whether it truly was a spontaneous break with reality. The trial began 7 months after the shooting, and lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented a case built on the argument that Marcus had been planning this for at least a month. They pointed to the fact that he'd been carrying the gun with him, that he'd gone to the Walmart that night even though his prescription could have waited, that he'd specifically gone looking for Jennifer in the back storage area where she wouldn't normally be. They argued this was premeditated murder, pure and simple. The defense countered with a temporary insanity argument that Marcus had suffered an acute psychological break when confronted with evidence of his wife's betrayal. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about crimes of passion, about how the human brain can essentially shut down rational thought when confronted with extreme emotional trauma. But the real bombshell came in week 2 of the trial, when the defense called Jennifer's co-worker, a woman named Tasha who'd worked the same shifts as Jennifer for 4 years. Tasha testified that she'd seen Jennifer and Kelly together at the Walmart multiple times over the past few months, and that their behavior had made her uncomfortable. She described seeing them holding hands in the break room, seeing Kelly kiss Jennifer's neck near the beverage aisle one night when they thought no one was watching, hearing Jennifer tell another coworker that her marriage was basically over and she was just waiting for the right time to leave. This testimony was devastating to the prosecution's case. It established that Marcus hadn't been paranoid, that there really had been something going on between Jennifer and Kelly, and that Marcus's reaction, while extreme and criminal, had been based on a real betrayal. But then came the prosecution's rebuttal, and this is where the story took its most unexpected turn. They called Kelly's therapist to the stand. Kelly had been seeing a counselor for depression and anxiety, and while most of their conversations were protected by doctor-patient confidentiality, the therapist was legally allowed to testify about statements Kelly had made that indicated someone was in danger. The therapist revealed that Kelly had told her, 3 weeks before her death, that she was afraid of Marcus, that he'd been acting strange, staring at her in ways that made her uncomfortable, that she thought he might try to hurt her. Kelly had asked the therapist what she should do, whether she should move out, but then in the next session had said things had calmed down and she felt safer. This testimony suggested that Marcus had been exhibiting threatening behavior before the shooting, that this wasn't a spontaneous break, but a building rage that Kelly had sensed and feared. The jury deliberated for 2 days. In the end, they found Marcus guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder. Not first-degree, which would have required proving premeditation beyond reasonable doubt, but second-degree, which acknowledged that while he'd intentionally killed them, it hadn't been planned in advance. The judge sentenced him to 40 years in prison, 20 for each count, to be served consecutively. At his sentencing hearing, Marcus spoke publicly for the first time since his initial confession. He didn't apologize. He didn't express remorse. He simply said that he'd lost everything the moment he saw them together, and that pulling the trigger had just been making the outside match what was already dead inside him. Jennifer's family called him a monster, demanded the maximum sentence, said he'd taken away a beautiful person who'd deserved so much better. Kelly's mother, Marcus's own mother, didn't attend the trial. She released a statement saying she'd lost all 3 of her children that night, and that she couldn't forgive any of them for the pain they'd caused. This wasn't just about a man who snapped. It was about a family whose fractures ran deeper than anyone on the outside could have known. It was about secrets kept in plain sight, about emotional needs that went unmet for so long they turned into something toxic. And it was about how quickly everything you think you know about someone can shatter when you finally see the truth they've been hiding. The Walmart where this happened reopened 3 days after the shooting, after a professional cleaning crew had removed all traces of what occurred in that storage area. Employees who'd been there that night said they could never walk past that section without remembering, without hearing the echoes of gunshots and screams. Some of them quit. Others stayed but requested transfers to different locations. The store itself put up a small memorial plaque in the break room, honoring Jennifer's 6 years of service, but there was no mention of how she died, no acknowledgement of the violence that had taken place just feet away from where customers bought groceries and household goods. The case sparked a national conversation about workplace safety, about domestic violence, about the warning signs people miss or ignore. Mental health advocates pointed to Marcus's undiagnosed depression and childhood trauma. Domestic violence experts talked about the importance of recognizing emotional abuse even when it doesn't involve physical violence. And gun control advocates added this to their list of tragedies that might have been prevented with stricter regulations. But at the center of all this analysis and debate were 3 people who'd once been a family. 3 people who'd eaten dinner together and watched television together and told each other they'd always be there for each other. And now 2 of them were dead, and the 3rd was in prison, and no amount of understanding or explanation could bring any of them back. So here's what I want you to think about. Do you think Marcus acted out of uncontrollable passion, a man pushed beyond his breaking point by unbearable betrayal? Or was this cold-blooded murder, a man who'd been planning to punish the 2 women who'd hurt him, who'd been carrying a gun and looking for an opportunity? There's evidence for both interpretations. The jury chose to believe it was somewhere in between. But what do you believe? And maybe more importantly, what would you do if you were in Marcus's position? Not the shooting, but the months before. If you suspected the person you'd married and the family member you'd helped over and over again were betraying you in the most intimate way possible, how would you handle it? Would you confront them? Would you walk away? Would you try to save the relationship or protect your own sanity? These aren't easy questions, and there are no perfect answers. But they're worth asking because the truth is, betrayal and rage and desperation, these are forces that exist in all of us. Most of us will never act on them the way Marcus did, thank God. But understanding how someone gets to that point, understanding the warning signs and the accumulated pain and the moment when everything breaks, that's how we prevent the next tragedy. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. Do you think Marcus deserves sympathy or just punishment? Do you think Jennifer and Kelly were victims or complicit in their own deaths? And if you thought this story was shocking, you need to hear what we've got coming next week. A case that makes this one look straightforward by comparison. A small town, a missing teenager, and a web of lies that reaches all the way to the mayor's office. You're not going to want to miss it. Subscribe now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.